So Apple have launched the M2 powered iPad Pro alongside the 10th generation newly designed iPads. I will have a separate video on the channel about those iPads, but in this video we are sticking with the iPad Pro. I've been using them for the last couple of days, and as an iPad Pro advocate, some of those views might surprise you. So let's just get this out of the way. This year's M2 powered iPad Pro looks and feels exactly the same as last year's M1 powered iPad Pro. I'm talking about if you were to have them side by side, it would be hard to tell the difference. They look the same, they feel the same, with the exception that this year Apple have placed the word Pro next to the word iPad. The screen technology is exactly the same as well. So you have that 120Hz Pro Motion, which by the way is absolutely stunning on that Liquid Retina XDR display. And you also have the anti-reflective coating. You also get them in those two sizes, the 11-inch or the 12.9-inch. I mean, this screen on the iPad Pro is still just as stunning as last year's, but side by side from a design perspective, there is really no difference. When it comes to cameras, this year's iPad Pros also have, like last year, the 12 megapixel wide lens, the 10 megapixel ultra wide lens, the LiDAR scanner, and the True Tone flash. And on the front, we have this 12 megapixel ultra wide lens with support for Stage Manager. Now, on the iPad Pro this year, what's odd is that they've left the camera in this position over here, whereas on the new 10th generation iPad, they moved it from there to up there, which is a bit more balanced, and most people do tend to use their iPads in this kind of landscape format. Maybe next year they might move the camera from here to there on this iPad Pro. The only difference this year is the fact that you do have on the M2 powered iPad Pro Smart HDR4 photos and the ability to shoot ProRes 4K up to 30 frames per second. But if you pick up a 128GB iPad Pro, then that will be limited to 1080p at 30 frames per second. When it comes to specs related to storage, Thunderbolt connectivity, 5G, this year's M2 powered iPad Pro is the same as last year's M1 powered iPad Pro, with the exception that this year we get Bluetooth 5.3 and Wi-Fi 6E. So those are all the similarities. Well, what's changed then? As the name implies, this year's iPad Pros have got a bump up in terms of chip with the M2 chip. Now that bump up from the M1 to the M2, according to Apple, means that you're going to get 18% faster CPU, 35% faster GPU, the 10 core versus the 8 core, and a 2 times boost in memory bandwidth from 50 gigabytes a second to 100 gigabytes per second. So for majority of users now, myself included, if you compare the M2 iPad Pro with last year's M1 iPad Pro, you aren't going to notice a difference at all, with the exception of one feature, and that's down to the Apple Pencil. If you use a second generation Apple Pencil, the M2 chip now combines with that to offer you a feature called the Apple Pencil Hover. And that is the ability from around about 12 millimeters, the iPad Pro is able to detect where the Apple Pencil is before you've actually physically placed it on the display, and it gives you essentially a preview of the mark that you're about to make. Now this works great, and it will impact those people that use the Apple Pencil for illustrative applications and other applications. In terms of performance, is if you come from another iPad to this year's iPad Pro. So let's say an iPad Air, and you decide to upgrade to the M2 iPad Pro, or an older iPad like the 6th or 7th generation, 8th generation, maybe even last year's 9th generation iPad, and then you decide to upgrade to the iPad Pro, that's where you will notice a difference in terms of performance. Now I'm going to say now what I said last year when the M1 chip came to the iPad Pro. Apple are doing this again with the M2 chip and the iPad Pro, and that is, I can't help but feel that the hardware is now overkill for what the software has to offer. And don't get me wrong, look, this year we also get the addition of iPad OS 16, and Apple have certainly made some incredible improvements here in terms of tweaks, both system-wide, but one of those criticisms around the lack of multitasking on an iPad. I think with a new feature called Stage Manager I've been using, I feel like it does greatly improve the multitasking element of what the iPad Pro has to offer. It's not going to appeal to everyone, and there'll be people that want more out of that multitasking experience, but I think a lot of people will be very happy with iPad OS. But I can't help but feel I kind of want more from the overall capabilities of what iPad OS has and the possibilities of what we've already seen from the M1 and also the M2 chips. There's also another important consideration related to price. So getting a 12.9-inch iPad Pro with the M2 chip and pairing it up with the Magic Keyboard can now be more expensive than getting the M2 MacBook Air, which for a lot of people might be better in terms of functionality. That touchscreen, the functionality of the Apple Pencil, the portability element of what the iPad has to offer. But for a lot of users now, the M2 chip being in the iPad Pro and the MacBook Air is going to make it a decision that they might weigh up both in terms of functionality, but also on pricing. Overall, those are my thoughts. Let me know what you think of this year's M2 powered iPad Pro in the comments down below. And if you've enjoyed this video, check out the video review for the 10th generation iPad. I'll see you there next.